SC Media and our sponsor, Axonius, are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. This is a show where CISOs share tales from the trenches and unpack leadership lessons learned along the way. Find this month's CISO Stories content at CISOstoriespodcast.com. Are you a cyber professional who enjoys writing policy documents or building checklists or creating documents from scratch? Do you have endless amounts of time and money to focus on developing tools and templates, or would you rather do the work of protecting your organization? The Cyber Risk Collaborative has developed new resource toolkits, which are CISO developed and topic curated guidance, tools, and templates to save your team tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours of work. Visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CRC to sign up for the community and get your toolkits. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back for another month's episode of CISO Stories Podcast. You got me, Jess, your host, back with you again, and my girl Erika is here with us as well. Super excited to have you. I'm not sure if we've had a financial tech guest on a show, or at least not with me before. So excited to hear all of your background and expertise and experiences about this month's topic. We're talking about attack surface management, which is super broad too, right? And so much is going on in our industry right now. Like it's hard to keep up. So thanks for joining us, Erika. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to, especially on this day when it's nice outside. It's beautiful to kind of look out and see the nice weather for a change.
Yes, you're in Virginia, right?
I am indeed. Yeah.
Right on. We're here up in the Northeast, or I think we just got past the second winter. It might be, and that might be spring now.
I think the same as here. It was warm and then it got really cold again, and now it's starting to warm up, which is great.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. You know, you and I talked about like the history of attack surface management, and like you've been in the game for a while, you know, and you've seen the evolution that's come thus far, and, you know, have some idea about where we're going, especially with like, we'll just say AI, right? We'll put it out there, all the good things that are coming with that. So let's talk about that. Can you give us some examples or talk about your experiences growing up in the industry? What did attack surface management look like before?
Yeah, it was a lot different 25 years ago. It's kind of crazy to say I've been in the business for 25 years. Um, but it was totally different. I mean, we were all in data centers. There wasn't a concept of cloud environment at the time. So your attack surface looked a lot different. There was mobile phones, but they were not smart mobile phones, right? And so the amount of attack surface you had to worry about and how you tracked it was completely different. It was manual. It was you just understanding your environment. And I don't even think at the time that most companies truly understood how to track asset management and attack surface to totally understand like how doing business with one company could impact your company. And I think that slowly evolved over the years. And if you look at it, even like 10 years ago, it had changed completely. By that time, we were moving into the cloud. Matter of fact, the company I was working at was one of the first financial institutions to go fully into the cloud. And so I think that being a part of all of those evolutions has really kind of like given me a lot of experience of knowing and understanding how do you pivot, especially with the world changing. You mentioned AI. AI is going to cause a lot of other things to happen. It's more about the automation of it and about the speed by which things happen. Not that the techniques will necessarily change a ton. So the attack surface itself will just broaden because you have to think faster and you have to make sure your tools and technology can keep up with it. So I remember when I first started, it was things like dial up, right? You had to worry about whether or not you had a phone line actually plugged into a computer system that wasn't secured and had like PC Anywhere on it and didn't have a password. Because that could be pretty dangerous. And if you didn't understand that your network was set up that way, that's an easy avenue. I remember doing more dialing, which is the act of actually trying to break in, right? And so it is kind of funny to know that nowadays you wouldn't necessarily do war dialing because it's a completely different setup. But it's a lot of fun to like really figure it out. And as the time has evolved, you now less manual and you want the automation, which is really key and pivotal in an attack management surface like tool and technology is like how do you actually make sure that it's able to keep up with your environment and your business? Because it is important to note that depending on your business, you might want to pivot slightly into different avenues and make sure that the tool is able to keep up with where you are. Like if you are a small business, your attack surface is going to be a lot smaller, especially if you don't engage with a lot of third parties. If you're a Fortune 500, like mega financial or tech company, you have a lot of third parties, you have a lot of attack surface, you have a lot of systems. Some companies have multiple cloud environments that you have to worry about, multiple like areas. Some financials aren't even in the cloud completely. So you've got the mix of on-prem and cloud environments. And so you do have to worry about like, what does it actually look like? Are your people allowed to use mobile devices? Which in today's environment, especially after COVID, the answer is mostly yes, right? That you can work from home. You're no longer required to work in the office in all cases. Although I'm starting to see that pivot back to you need to work in the office. But all of those things kind of add into how do you think about attack management?
You just gave me anxiety, all that. I was like, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. There's just so much going on.
Yeah.
You mentioned word dialing. Oh my gosh, I remember when contracts had that in as part of an
Yeah.
assessment. And even like 10 years ago, I was like, what the heck is that? Like, who does that anymore? Um, yeah, well, great points. Like, the smartphones that we have now versus before. I don't know if you had a beeper. I'm dating myself too,
I
but
did have a pager.
you had a
Yeah.
beeper? Oh, I had a Motorola clear blue pager, and I
Yeah.
thought I was the coolest thing ever. But yeah, like especially in financial tech, like I could imagine when, before people would go into like the bank, right, and withdraw money that way or deposit money for that matter. And then we went to the Mac machines or ATM machines to do all that. And now everything's online. So, I'm
Yeah.
guessing or I'm assuming that, your job has changed quite significantly from a fintech perspective when it comes to like safeguarding data, the confidentiality and integrity, right? If I have $10,000, my bank account better not say $10, right? So
Exactly.
how have you seen that really evolve, and how has that impacted the way that you do business and you handle the security operations within your team and also your day to day?
Yeah, you have to literally think about the companies you work for. So think about the different kinds of financials, even if you look at banks. So you have the traditional banks where it's a brick and mortar, you have online banks. And so that attack surface is going to look different. I remember when I worked at an actual banking institution, and the first concept of this cafe kind of came out where you could actually have customers just sit there and lounge all day long at a place by which you could do financial transactions. From a security standpoint, imagine what that's like having people be able to sit in the environment by which you need to secure. And normally you only have to worry about the interaction like 10 or 15 minutes, right? But for them to be able to sit there literally all day long with their laptops, which means, okay, well, can they connect to your wireless and get into your network? Can they find another way by which they can get in? So you have to think evolution wise, how do you evolve your idea of securing it and understanding your attack surface based off of where you work and what you're trying to actually accomplish. So I've definitely seen it evolve over the years. And when I think about IoT devices and when you want to have more tech savvy individuals play with more devices that also intertwine with financial, you have to take all of that in consideration. And it's one of the most important pieces of not just understanding your attack surface, but being involved in the conversations before business decisions are made. So you can help make the right business decisions and make sure the right protections are in place as you're doing it, because monitoring your attack surface is one thing, but making sure that nothing happens before you detect it in a monitoring situation is even more important. Because, like you said, that's your money. If you have $10,000 in it, you don't want to see you now have $10 in it. And the only way to do that is to be proactive versus reactive. A lot of attack monitoring is about reaction, right? You're trying to detect whether or not you see something that shouldn't be there. But if you're in the conversations before they stand it up, then you have to just worry about whether or not they're turning down things that they shouldn't have still standing up. But it's definitely evolved, especially in the banking world, because you want things to be easier and more convenient for your customers. But at the same time, you have to think about like, is it also more convenient for an attacker? How could they leverage it? Can we prevent that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we say. It's all about convenience, right? And with convenience often comes those vulnerabilities, or like you said, if you don't ask the questions and you don't prepare and do the analysis beforehand, could be in big trouble. I saw that Capital One in DC, they had a little cafe in there, and I'm like, who wants to hang out in a Capital One bank and drink their coffee? And so, like, I didn't even think about it till you just mentioned that. Like, I'm assuming, I hope that they would have separate networks, right? That as far as the, guest Wi-Fi versus corporate. But still, like, there's so many layers. What if there's like a corporate person sitting in there and using the public Wi-Fi because they didn't know better, or they just didn't care?
Yep.
Convenience, like you said. I would imagine that would be a nightmare to some degree, to have to like be a security officer, CISO, for that kind of environment when it comes to financials, and it just being so sensitive, the privacy about
Yep.
everything, and a GRC too. So good segue, as far as management. You just mentioned, understanding your business and being able to plan properly and understanding business requirements
Yep.
and all that, so you can properly roll it out and implement the correct security controls. What are some ways that you ensure that that actually happens, or have participated within your other within the organizations you work for? Well, not just financial, but I know that's your background. But what are some of the ways that we really need to be proactive in understanding our attack surface management?
Yeah, there's multiple different things that you have to take in consideration. Some of them are pretty basic. One, you have to be in the conversations, like I mentioned. So you should have like a security by design or something that gets you into the conversation before it's actually developed, during the design phase. So you can decide which controls do you need? How will it interact with our customers? Will it interact with the customers? Will it have a different engagement for our employees? Will it have a third party? So all of those questions can be answered, and you can actually make sure you have the right controls in place. Once you get through that design phase, and if you've identified any vulnerabilities, you need to make sure that they're fixed. At least the criticals and the highs, and hopefully most of the mediums are done before it actually goes live. And then I would say the other part is that making sure that you have good business continuity plans and disaster recovery, because that helps to keep track of all of the different interconnectivity, from a reliance perspective, right? So just because this system is the one you currently manage and it is the main one that is like the customer facing, doesn't mean it doesn't have back end ties to like a third party system, to another system within your perimeter. And so you want to make sure that you actually understand all of those connective tissues. So the tracking of that is really important. Any vulnerabilities that you discover, if you decide to temporarily accept the risk or even long term, that should be tracked. And so when we talk about management holistically, it does need to make sure that it covers all the different areas, but not just pulls in the technology components of it, but also the business piece. Because when you're working with a financial or a tech company, or pretty much any business, at the end of the day, the business is going to drive a lot of the priorities, right? It's going to be based off of cost. It's going to be based off of whether or not it's going to impact the bottom line or our customers. You want to make sure you have all those pieces tied together so that the conversation goes a lot smoother, and you're able to actually prioritize the right things, and you know and understand like where do you have that vulnerability. And the reason why you want it in a system of record of some sort is so that you can tie together all the vulnerabilities and understand this new product's about to launch. We know we have a vulnerability in this thread right here. It ties to this, and we didn't know it at first. Now we know this new product will have a new vulnerability from the get-go unless you fix this one. So the tracking and management of it is very, very critical. It's not just about the discovery. It is about understanding how they all tie together across your entire enterprise and network of systems and people, because people are also an asset of sorts. They're also one of the most easiest things to attack, right? So you need to understand how they actually operate, and what processes do they touch.
Drowning in security alerts? Losing visibility across your attack surface? Axonius delivers truth to action with comprehensive asset intelligence, building a complete, accurate view of all your assets, sourced from every tool, so you can finally understand and minimize your attack surface. Gain unshakable confidence. Proactively secure your enterprise. Discover and fix threats in one place. Take control of complexity. Get started with Axonius today at CISOstoriespodcast.com/Axonius. I'd imagine the risk tolerance level is pretty low. Or yeah, as far as what you're willing to accept, like you don't accept anything in financial, right? Like,
Yes, it has to
I
be pretty tight. Otherwise, it can be a very bad day, and you don't you don't want that bad day.
yeah. Gosh, I don't remember. I don't know if I really ever had an instance where like my bank was down. Now that I think about it, it's accessibility. Other than maybe routine maintenance in the middle of the night, you can't check your account or whatever. But
Yeah.
um, I don't know. Have you? You don't have to tell me any details, but just as far as being in fintech and security for so long, like, have you had something like that happen, or are you seen in the
Well,
wild that you were able to learn from?
yeah, I think that if you think way back when, and this is a good prime example of understanding how reliance on third parties impacts a business, the financial institutions that had moved over to the cloud environment and they didn't understand the concept of multi-region when AWS and GCP just first stood up, right? um, the time that your cloud provider goes down, like the entire region goes down and you don't have an alternate one, it does cause your business to go down and including financials, right? Even though it's not technically their fault in the sense that none of their systems were the cause of it, the root cause of it, it can still impact where there's a time frame by which your systems are down until you're actually able to bring them back up or figure out like how do you actually revive it. I have seen it happen over the years, like when during even on-prem days, um, there was an underlining like system error with one of the vendors that we used, and it caused all of their systems to go down. And so therefore we went down. And so resiliency, even though it's not necessarily an attack from a threat actor, you still have to understand like how does it impact you? Because yes, technically a threat actor could have been a cause on a third party, caused them to go down, which caused a larger company to go down. But you do need to understand how that works from a resiliency standpoint. It's why the business continuity and disaster recovery plans are so important. So you know how much reliance and do you have a backup plan already in place? It's one of the reasons I think from a regulatory perspective that you really start to see that push back in like 2015-ish, of like really making sure that you actually have the plans in place and that you can really see that they've been testing resiliency wise. So if something goes down with your cloud provider, you have an alternate way of making sure that you can still operate the business, especially in financial and those that would be time sensitive. So like a bank is one thing, having access to your money obviously is very important, but if it is more like a brokerage where it's going to have the dependency on whether or not the market and someone could lose a lot of money during that time or that window that you're down, vendor gets very unhappy about that. And so regulatory wise, we've started to see that change as well, which I think is a really good thing because companies should be thinking about resiliency. So back when I first started, it wasn't a hot topic, but I think that's definitely grown over the years.
For sure. You just said this entire conversation, you hit on best practices, right? You talked about asset management, knowing what's in your environment, knowing your organization, of course, the type of data, um, resiliency, having those disaster recovery plans and tabletop exercises. How important is it that, and how frequent within fintech do you suggest, or how often do you actually execute those plans? And are they more conceptual or failover type of exercises?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would recommend for everyone that's in a financial, especially, that the plans have to be updated at least once a year, but they really should be living documents, right? Where anything time something changes, you're updating it. From a testing perspective, depending on which components we're talking about, they could be tested anywhere from quarterly to annually. The things that would be more like uh, called Trex, right? Technical recovery exercises. Essentially, you want to literally make it seem like you have a problem and your whole system goes down and you have to recover in another environment. You should be doing that at least once a year. And the only reason I would say it's harder to do it more frequently than once a year is because it does require you to literally switch all your traffic over to another area, and you want to test those in segments so you know which area might have the problem. Um, and you do that systematically. And the larger the company, the longer that will take. But you do want to make sure you basically have like a doomsday kind of test, because that way you actually know whether or not you have a problem within your system and can it actually fail over when you need it. Because you want most of that to be automated. You don't want someone having to physically switch over if there's a problem, because that's a delay. That means that you will literally have some downtime. You don't want the downtime. And so you want that to be automatic. A lot of cloud providers do have some within the same region where it's very seamless. You can't even tell it's switching from, one VPC to another, which is really, really great. But I think that if you end up with two per cloud providers and you need to be able to test between the two, you definitely need to make sure that you're doing that failover test and make sure it's seamless. So that testing is really important, and timing. Some of it will be about your company, the size of it, how frequently you can do it. Also, how much it disrupts the business, because you need people to participate, especially the engineers. They obviously have day jobs, especially if they're a fast moving tech company where they need to develop things and turn things around every, 2 to 3 weeks. And so you have to kind of work that into the schedule, because it is a really important part of managing your enterprise.
Oh, great information there. I think that goes across every industry, really. But, like we said earlier, it really depends on the business. Smaller
Yeah.
business can't afford, or maybe that's not part of their jam anyway, to do the disaster recovery exercise, like the actual turn off, turn on. You mentioned having two different clouds. So you got me thinking, because I'm an auditor, my background, and there are some controls that say you should have two different vendors for firewalls. You should have two different vendors for ISPs, and having that contingency there, in case one is compromised or just offline. Period. Do you see that a lot in fintech, where you have those backups and multiple vendors for similar or same services?
I think it really depends on the service. I have not seen it where they will replicate their entire environment in another cloud. It would be so expensive, especially in some of the top banks that you have. Um, it would be very, very expensive to set it up in like AWS and then replicate it in Microsoft or in GCP. The amount of overhead, because they're also so vastly different, there's coding changes that would have to be done. I think that would be a little bit more overhead than what most companies would want to do. And for the most part, if you look at historical, rarely do those institutions go down. And so the risk is a lot smaller. Not to say that it's never going to be possible, because I think anything's possible, but the likelihood is pretty small. I remember having a conversation with a regulator when we first started moving to the cloud. And this was probably like literally like 15 years ago, something like that. Um, and the auditor, the regulator was like, okay, how do you make sure that you won't go down? Like, what happens if AWS just shuts down from a business standpoint? And I was like, well, unlikely, because they're involved in a lot of things right now. And I said, I think we need to think about it from an electrical institutional perspective, right? What if your power company goes down? It's the same kind of relevance. It will cause such a dramatic impact across the entire area by which that is supporting. AWS is no different. If all of AWS went down, that would be a huge impact on the world, not even just our country. Um, and so they do have a lot of resiliency built in, but it is one of the reasons why part of deciding which cloud provider to go to should be about, do they actually have the capacity to support a business like yours, especially if you're in financial or in the medical field, right, where you actually need to make sure your systems are up and running. Does it have the capacity? At one point in time, there when all the providers were starting to figure out, like, are they going to offer cloud services? I think that Azure was there, GCP started to play in the pool. AWS was one of the first ones, and they weren't already at the very beginning, right? And so it was important about interviewing the companies and understanding, like, what did they have. And I don't think that's any different, even though they're still the main three players in the industry around cloud provider services. If you decide to go with another one, you still need to make sure you're doing that due diligence and understanding, like, what are you not getting if you're not going with one of the three major ones. And if you're going with one of the three, does it provide the services that you need, which is really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So we got a couple more minutes. So let's fast forward. Let's fast forward for the next 20 years. I'm sure we'll still be around, OGs then. Where do you see the evolution of attack surface management going, fintech or otherwise? Like, what do you think's on the horizon that, you're preparing for now? I know, like, we talked about AI briefly, but, quantum computing, I mean, there's just so much ahead of us. It's very exciting. So, is there some things that the financial industry has been working towards, or regulations or practices that you're doing to gear up to be able to support that new technology and advanced tech that's coming down the pike?
I'm going to talk about it in two different ways. One, how I think the security side will leverage the technology, and then the other side, how a threat actor would leverage it, and us as security professionals have to account for it. The From a security standpoint, we're definitely going to be leveraging AI and the advances in quantum computing to be able to detect things a lot faster and understand where we see all of the threat vectors coming. And it'll be about pattern behavior even more so in the future, which will be really, really great. And so what we're going to find is that hopefully it'll be able to detect whether or not someone's behavior is starting to go down the path of uh, making it so we know that that's now an insider, and that'll be really great for us to understand what that looks like. The other piece of it is from a threat actor perspective, I think it's just going to continue to get a lot faster, and the mechanisms by which we see the attacks today, whether it's phishing or whether it is finding a hole within the network, because they're going to be getting a lot more sophisticated from a scanning perspective. It is really making sure that you have your entire environment buttoned up, that you have canaries so that you can actually see whether or not they're playing in the environment in a bad way, and that you can continue to build out those technologies. So I do think it's going to be both. We're going to see the automation where it will be more seamless. It'll become more automated than it is even today, which is the direction that I'm even hoping to like make sure that we're starting to like thread in the AI into all of the different controls that we have, and from both the attack simulation perspective, because you want to make sure your controls are able to defend against it. That's going to be automated. We already are starting to see that a little bit in the industry today, and I think 20 years from now, it's almost all going to be automated, right? That's the design. That I do find it a little funny because sometimes we think we can get further than what we can, but that's my goal. My goal is to be a bit more on the cutting edge of where we have been able to get to. I think if you talk to someone 20 years ago, they probably would have thought we had flying cars by now, which of course we don't. So um, it'll be very interesting to see where we progress. But technology just continues to evolve. It continues to get faster. It won't surprise me if the type of technology that we're leveraging 20 years from now is even more so than we could even imagine. If you thought 20 years ago we would have had smartphones that you could hold in the palm of your hand and it's like a computer, no one would have said that we could have done that. So it'll be very interesting to see where it all leads.
Agreed. Excuse me. The flying cars aren't far behind us. Well, we are at time. This has been great. I have like a million other questions, but we don't have time. Maybe we could talk later. I do like to ask my guests this question. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So what would Erika today tell Erika when she was 18? What advice would you give her?
Uh, I would say that I would just tell her to continue down the path that she was already going. Although at 18, I thought I was going to be an artist and have my own design studio of dresses and clothing wear. So it is funny how things change, but I would tell her not to stray from being open minded about the future, because that's how I got here. So I would not tell her the
Awesome.
lottery number though. No, that would be bad.
All right. Well, that's so awesome. Hey, you can get yourself a studio with dresses anytime. Okay. You still could do that. All right. Don't give up
That's
that
true.
dream. Don't give up that dream. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge and dropping some gems. Erika, awesome stuff you're doing in the community for cyber. Love seeing women in cyber excel. So thank you for everything you do and being on the show. And, be well and all that stuff. Enjoy this spring weather now, I guess, is here. Have a good time this summer. We'll be in touch. Hope to run into you. And thanks everybody for listening as well. Until next time. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in for this month's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to this month's sponsor, Axonius. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast and you will receive a new episode on the second Monday of each month.